This will be a brief history of the behavior of the fundamental eye discovered by Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe. And what he established was that the normal eye changes its refractive state from plus to minus from doing close work. This is completely normal, completely expected, except Kepler didn't realize it. So Kepler, mathematician, astronomer, had the job of calculating the orbit of Mars. And in this work, he had the data from Tycho Brahe. And unfortunately, no lights. They use candlelight. If you ever work by candlelight, what are you doing? Intricate calculations. So after 4 or 5 years of this, he noticed that his normal eye's refractive state had gone from plus to minus, or from 2020 to about 2060. The math of the eye had been developed in the previous 100 years. So he could analyze the eye as a camera, and he measures the eye's refractive state the same way I measure it. You have an object in the distance, and you select stronger minus lenses until you find one that clears your vision. And that's a direct measurement, which is most accurate. You just need a set of lenses and intelligence to make measurements. In fact, you can measure a positive refractive state of the fundamental eye the same way, except you read the 20/20 line and hold up a plus lens, and if you're still reading 20/20 through a plus, your refractive state is measured as positive. However, Kepler didn't know this. He had an emergency situation where he had a minus lens, he could hold it up and it would clear effectively 20/20 line. And he wanted to get on with his calculations. So the intricacies or the intelligence to understand all eyes are dynamic, and this close work inevitably produces a negative refractive state for the completely normal eye. But Kepler didn't want to bother with that. He had a solution in the minus lens. So he sketched the eye as a camera, which it never was. But it makes explaining things a lot easier if you sketch the eye as a camera, which it never was. So if you just think of the eye as having positive and negative refractive states, you can understand how to measure the refractive states of all normal or fundamental eyes. So yes, the normal eye changes from plus to minus, and if done correctly, from minus to plus if you're on the order of 20/40. So that's a story of how the camera eye was invented by Kepler, and it's quite good. However, it's not accurate because no fundamental eye ever was like that, and he didn't know that. And most people in optometry don't know this, or they don't want to know it, and the public doesn't want to know it either. So basically, nobody knows anything until you get yourself away from optometry and away from the idea that all eyes are bad cameras. Unfortunately, that's the only thing they teach in optometry and ophthalmology, except for Rupa Wong. And Rupa Wong has the right idea. You don't do this. You don't do what Kepler did, and you therefore don't have a problem. But it's moving heaven and earth to get a child to read at 20 inches. And that seems to be the beyond ability of most people, to parents, to understand you got to keep the kid's nose 20 inches from the page, and other activity like tennis. How all this falls on deaf ears. How do I know this? Because Rupa Wong says it. She says when she's talking to parents who have 20/20, they don't want concept. They don't want prevention. They don't want their kids doing anything other than a minus lens. And the kids hate prevention. If it means they have to keep their heads off the page 20 inches. That would probably work with Rupa. She's absolutely determined to make it work for her children and is working. So while other kids are doing what Kepler did, her kids are 20 inches, 10 inches, 20 inches. Wasn't Kepler's fault. He just needed to fix himself to get on with his calculations. So he put his minus lens on and kept on doing close work. Well, the optics of a lens is it moves everything closer to your eyes. So not only does it not help, it moves even closer. So the very thing that resulted in the normal eye changing from plus to minus, which was doing this, is now made worse by that minus lens. Nobody does this intentionally, but the degree of ignorance of the eye's behavior is profound. I can't change it. I learned it the hard way from Jacob Rafelson, who intuitively understood that all eyes are dynamic birth. And while he did not want to use the minus lens on any child, he had no choice, because the parents who had 20/20 would never understand the science of all eyes starting at birth as dynamic systems. So it's virtually impossible to talk to parents who have 20/20 and the problem the kid is inducing in himself by doing this. And the parents don't want to talk about it, the kids don't want to do anything. Thus it creates 3 billion myopic kids or adults. Once you start with a minus lens, it's over for you. Finished, kaput. Sorry that happened. Sorry that parents who have 20/20 won't take the time to understand the whole concept of the eye's behavior as a dynamic system. So I don't blame the optometrist. Unfortunately, I must blame ignorance. The ignorance of the public and the ignorance of parents and failure to face facts and science concerning the eye at birth. And if you look at the eye as a refractive state and measure it that way, even with a retinoscope, you'll demonstrate the same thing. As long as you stop thinking camera and stop calling all refractions defects, errors, that is the biggest fault they have of calling all refractive states of the completely normal eye medical defects. But it becomes medical because the parents don't understand the eye's behavior. They want nearsightedness to be a medical problem and take the little kitty to someone medical and fix them with a strong minus lens. So Kepler didn't know this. He discovered by direct measurement that his normal eyes had a negative refractive state. So there are only two ways of making measurements. That's Kepler's way and the way I do it. And then there's a method developed later on to measure the primate eye. A primate can't tell you blur. You can't tell better or worse. A human being can. I can. But to measure primates, they have to freeze the eye with a drug, normally atropine. And this is what Francis Young did. Perfectly legitimate. Because provided you don't get confused with freezing the eye for measurement versus measuring the refractive state of all normal eyes the way Kepler did it. Kepler knew there's a problem, but he didn't know what to do with it, and he didn't know what to do about it. That truth became clear years later, providing you're an engineer designing control systems, because all eyes control their refractive state to the average of accommodation. It's the average plus an offset of about 2 diopters. If you keep your eyes at 20 inches or minus 2 diopters, and half the day you're outdoors, your average is minus 1 diopter. If that's your average, your refractive state will probably play positive, stay positive, because you can always measure it the way Kepler measured it. So that's a brief history of Kepler, his math calculations. They did their Rudolphine tables, and that's intricate. Kepler was trying to make the Mars fit a circular orbit, and that didn't work. So with a lot of adjusting things, he realized the Mars orbit was elliptical and basic laws. So that's a brief history of the behavior of the total normal eye and how you measure it at home, or how I measure it. It's quite accurate. Just takes time, good engineering, and skill to know what you're doing and make accurate refractive measurements. Add your own commentary, and if you don't like what Kepler did, it's incredible. And he did the practical thing, was to measure his refraction using test lenses, which is what I'm doing, the right way to do it. And thank you for your interest.